The wood made a different sound with each impact. It wasn't like chopping wood or hitting a door. It had a wetter, denser sound, almost musical in its terrible uniqueness. I remember looking at my hands afterwards, shaking, with the cane still firmly between my fingers. That same cane he used to support himself around the house, feigning frailty while hiding his true nature. They say blood is thicker than water, but that night I discovered it is also darker when spilled on light wood flooring. At that moment, I didn't feel like a monster. I felt at peace, as if I had freed not only myself, but also her, my mother. The secrets I discovered in that house changed everything. And no matter how hard I try, I can't regret what I did with that cane. My name is Miguel Hernandez, and I'm 18 years old now. I'm sitting in this empty square because this is where I used to hide when things got tough at home. I always liked the silence here on winter mornings when no one else comes. The cold air cutting my face reminds me that I'm still alive, that I still feel something beyond the emptiness. Today I left the Juvenile Rehabilitation Center, where I spent the last 2 years. 2 years paying for something that to me was only justice. The people in town look at me differently now. The stares that follow me down the street are heavy, laden with judgment. They whisper that I am a monster who attacked a defenseless old man, a respected war hero. Even some who I considered friends now cross the street so they don't have to walk on the same side as me. As if violence were contagious, as if they could see what I did marked on my skin. They don't know. No one knows what I found in that diary. No one understands what it means to grow up in a house where smiles hide scars too deep to be seen, where walls absorb screams that no one else hears, where silence is the only protection left. I think every family has its secrets, right? Little lies, indiscretions, shame hidden in closed closets. But some secrets are different. Some secrets are like poison. They run through you, cell by cell, until there is nothing left but pain and rage. That's what happened to me. The poison of 3 generations of secrets finally overflowed. I'm going to tell you everything from the beginning. Not to justify myself, because even I don't know if there is any justification for what I did, but so that you understand, so that someone finally understands that sometimes when all the doors are closed, when all the cries for help are ignored, violence becomes the only language left. I know it seems strange to confess this to a camera, to people I've never met, but maybe it's easier this way, talking to strangers who can't interrupt me, who can't judge me face to face, who can just listen until the end. If you're really paying attention to my story, I need you to like this video right now, subscribe to the Traumatic Testimonials channel, turn on the bell to receive the next stories, and comment from where you're watching this. I need to know who's really listening to me, who's trying to understand. This is important to me because the truth I'm about to reveal is not something I can easily share. Every comment shows me that I'm not alone with these thoughts, with this pain, that maybe there are others out there living in homes like mine, needing to hear that there is a way out, even if it was the one I chose. What I'm about to tell you will completely change what you think you've understood so far. Nothing is as simple as it seems, especially when it comes to families, to violence that is passed down from generation to generation like a poisoned inheritance, to silences that scream louder than any words. I grew up in a 2-story yellow house at the end of a quiet street in the San Miguel neighborhood of Puebla, one of those streets where everyone knows each other, where children play on the sidewalk until nightfall and mothers call from the window when dinner is ready, where neighbors exchange recipes and gossip over well-kept fences, the kind of place that appears in margarine commercials, where everything seems perfect on the surface. Our family was small. Me, my mother, and my maternal grandfather. My father was never around. According to my mother, he left before I was even born. A man without responsibility, she would say, with that distant look that I didn't understand as a child. Better off without him. For a long time, I believed that story. Why wouldn't I? It was easier to imagine an absent father by choice than the truth I would discover years later. My mother, Alina Hernandez, was always quiet. She worked as a nurse at the city hospital, double shifts. Sometimes, when she came home, she seemed to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders. She was pretty, but in a sad way. She had big brown eyes that seemed to hold ancient secrets, and that smile that never reached her eyes, as if it were a mask she put on when necessary. I grew up accustomed to that smile, without understanding what it hid. She loved me, I'm sure of that, but it was a quiet, almost desperate love. She hugged me as if she were afraid I might disappear at any moment. She sang to me when she thought I was asleep, lullabies her grandmother had taught her. In the good moments, those rare moments when it was just the two of us, she seemed almost happy, almost at peace. My grandfather, Roberto Hernandez, moved into our house when I was 8 years old. Before that, I only saw him on special occasions, birthdays, and holidays. He lived in another city, and his visits always made my mother tense and restless. At the time, I thought it was just the stress of having visitors. He was tall, with a rigid posture despite his age. White hair, always impeccably combed, neatly trimmed beard. A former military man, I was told. He had several medals stored in a wooden box that he sometimes showed me, telling stories of bravery and courage. He had a presence that filled rooms. When he entered, the air seemed to become heavier, voices lower, movements more restrained. Your grandfather is a hero, the neighbors would say. A man of respect, the teachers would comment. And I believed it, of course. Why wouldn't I? He was my grandfather, an important man in the community, respected by all. At first, everything seemed normal. He brought me gifts, told me war stories that were probably made up, taught me to play chess on Sunday afternoons. He called me little man. He told me I was the man of the house in my father's absence, that I needed to grow up strong to protect my mother. I liked the attention. I liked feeling that I had a male role model, someone to teach me how to be a man. But I remember exactly when things started to change. It was a Wednesday afternoon on my way home from school. I found my mother in the kitchen washing the dishes. My grandfather was sitting at the table drinking coffee, nothing out of the ordinary. But when I walked in, I noticed something different about his posture, how she was slouching, how her movements were tense, almost robotic, how she avoided looking at him or me. That's when I noticed the marks on her wrist, small purple spots like fingerprints. When I asked about them, my grandfather answered before she could open her mouth. Your mother is clumsy, she always has been. She tripped on the stairs last night. She just nodded, without looking me in the eye. It was the first time I felt that strange feeling in my stomach, as if something was deeply wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on what it was. At age 10, I began to notice the tense silences during dinner, how my grandfather looked at my mother in a way that made me uncomfortable, even though I didn't understand why, how she avoided his gaze, how her hands trembled as she served the food, how she hardly ate, just moved the food around on her plate. Eat well, Alina, he would say in that voice that brooked no argument. You look like a scarecrow. And she would obey, forcing herself to swallow every bite, like a little girl trying to please a strict father. At night, I began to hear strange sounds coming from her room. I couldn't understand what it was. Sometimes it sounded like crying, other times it was absolute silence, almost more disturbing than any sound. When I was 12, I noticed that my mother started taking sleeping pills. Lots of pills. I found her once in the bathroom, staring at a row of orange bottles, as if they were her salvation. When she noticed me, she quickly closed the cabinet, forcing a vacant smile. "It's just to help me rest," she explained. "Work at the hospital is stressful." Sometimes I would find her on the couch in the early hours of the morning, staring into space with red eyes. When I asked what had happened, she would just smile that empty smile and say that everything was fine, that I should go back to bed, that it was too late for a child to be awake. Nothing was fine. I began to realize this more and more clearly, although I couldn't articulate what was wrong. My grandfather grew older, becoming more physically fragile. At 75, he began to use a cane for support. It was made of dark, polished wood with a silver handle shaped like an eagle's head. He always kept it within reach, as if it were an extension of his body, like a scepter, a symbol of authority. Even so, his presence remained heavy, oppressive. The cane did not diminish his power. In some way, it amplified it. At school, I began to have problems. Fights with classmates, low grades, difficulty concentrating. The teachers called my mother, who appeared with deep dark circles under her eyes and that same empty smile, wearing long-sleeved blouses, even on the hottest days. "He's just going through a phase," she would tell the teachers. "It's hard to grow up without a father." But it wasn't a phase. It was a response to what I felt without being able to name it. It was the weight of that house, of that silence, of those looks. It was the constant feeling that something terrible was happening right under my nose, and I was powerless to stop it. I tried to talk to her a few times. "Mum, you seem sad." "It's because of Grandpa. He hurts you." She always deflected the subject with a mixture of fear and irritation. "Don't be silly, Miguel. Your grandfather takes care of us. He gave us a roof over our heads when we had nothing. We should be grateful." Gratitude, that was the word she always used, as if we owed him something, as if his presence were a favor, not a right, as if anything he did were acceptable because of that imaginary debt. At 13, I began to observe the dynamics between them more closely, how he controlled everything, the money, the decisions, even what we ate for dinner, how my mother, a grown woman, asked permission to go out, to buy clothes, to visit a friend, how her whole body tensed when he entered the same room. At 15, I tried to seek help. I talked to a counselor at school about how strange things were at home, about how my mother seemed like a ghost, about how my grandfather controlled everything, about the marks I sometimes saw on her arms, about the medications, about the nighttime crying. The counselor listened to me with a serious expression, taking notes. She promised to look into it. He said he would talk to social workers. For a brief moment, I felt hopeful. That same afternoon, the counselor called home. When I got to school, my grandfather was waiting for me in the living room, sitting in his favorite armchair, his cane resting between his knees. "Sit down," he ordered, pointing to the sofa in front of him. I obeyed, feeling my stomach sink. "I got an interesting call today," he said in a dangerously calm voice, "about you making up stories at school about our family." "I didn't make anything up," I replied, trying to sound braver than I felt. He tapped his cane on the floor, the sound echoing in the room. "Don't lie to me, boy. Never to me." Then he called me over for a man-to-man talk. He explained in that controlled voice that was almost more frightening than the shouting, how I was being ungrateful, how he had taken me and my mother in when no one else would, how I was embarrassing the family with my fantasies. "Men settle their problems within the family," he said in that voice that brooked no argument. "Never embarrass your mother like this again. Do you understand?" I understood. I understood that no one would come to help us, that people only saw what they wanted to see. A devoted grandfather, a normal family, perhaps with some problems, but nothing out of the ordinary, nothing that justified intervention. After that, I stopped trying to find help. I started spending less and less time at home. I stayed at the library until it closed. I slept at friends' houses when possible. I began to wonder if it was all in my head, if I was imagining problems where none existed, if I was the problem. But then, at 16, I noticed the marks on my mother's arms. They weren't small bruises like before. They were more visible, more violent marks. She started wearing only long-sleeved clothes, even in the hottest summer our city had ever seen. When I asked about it, she said they were accidents at work, that caring for patients sometimes left marks. Some patients get agitated, she explained, pulling down her sleeve. It's normal in nursing. But I no longer believed those stories. I could no longer pretend I didn't see what was happening. That's when I started to observe more closely, to listen through the walls, to notice patterns, how my grandfather would call my mother to help him with something in his room, and how she would come back from there different, quieter, more dead inside, how she would take long baths afterwards, scrubbing her skin until it was red, as if trying to cleanse something more than just dirt. I started having nightmares. I dreamed of screams muffled by pillows, of locked doors that I couldn't open. No matter how hard I tried, I would wake up sweating, my heart racing. Something was very wrong in that house, and I was becoming more and more aware of it. At that time, I began to think about running away, about convincing my mother to run away with me. But where to? With what money? My grandfather controlled everything. The bank accounts, the documents, even who could and couldn't visit our house. And he also had contacts, friends, in the police, in the judicial system, in the mayor's office. He always said this as a veiled threat. In this country, a man with my connections always finds what he's looking for. So I stayed and watched and felt the rage grow inside me, day after day, night after night, a silent rage that I kept as a secret, because in that house we all learned to keep secrets. I began to engage in small acts of rebellion. I came home late from school. I talked back when he criticized me. Small things, nothing that would justify an extreme reaction, but enough to divert some of his attention from my mother to me, to give her moments of respite, even if they were brief. He responded, sure, by cutting my allowance, forbidding me to go out with friends. Once, when I answered him particularly sharply during dinner, he slapped me so hard that his fingerprints were visible on my face for days. My mother just watched silently, her eyes downcast, her hands trembling slightly. Your grandfather only wants what's best for you, she said later, applying ice to my face. He had a difficult upbringing. He doesn't know how to express affection any other way. Affection, as if there were any affection in that house. I began to wonder about my father, the man I never knew. I began to dream that he would come back one day, that he would take us away from there. A childish fantasy, I know, but sometimes fantasies are all we have. It was in the summer of my 17th year that things began to become unbearable. My mother was getting thinner and thinner, more and more absent, her body present but her mind far away, as if she had found a way to escape without actually leaving. She was taking more medication, not just to sleep now, but during the day as well. Colored pills that left her with a glazed look in her eyes. She slurred her words. Sometimes she spent whole days in bed saying she was sick. My grandfather told everyone that she had nervous problems, that she was fragile like her mother. He took it upon himself to call the hospital to explain her absences, keeping up appearances. Her mother, my grandmother, A woman I never knew, died young in circumstances that no one could explain clearly. An accident, they said vaguely. When I asked for details, my grandfather's expression closed. Some stories are not for children, he would say, even when I was no longer a child. That summer, I started working part-time at a mechanic's shop in the neighborhood. I needed to get out of that house, to breathe air that wasn't heavy with tension and fear. And I secretly began to save money. Not much, just enough to maybe one day have a chance to escape. It was also that summer that I met Lucia, a new girl in the neighborhood. She had green eyes that seemed to see right through you, and an easy smile that was the opposite of my mother's forced smile. We started talking, riding bikes together, watching the sunset in the park. For the first time, I felt something close to happiness. My grandfather didn't like her. "That girl has a bold look," he once remarked when he saw her waiting for me at the door. "She's not the right kind of company." But, for the first time, I ignored his opinions. I continued to see Lucia, even if it was in secret. She became my refuge, the only person with whom I could be just a normal teenager, not the keeper of terrible secrets. One day I came home early from work. The house was quiet, but I heard sounds coming from my mother's room. They weren't screams. They were worse than screams. They were muffled pleas, punctuated by sobs. "Please, Dad, no more, please." Her voice was so small, so broken, like the voice of a little girl, not an adult woman. I stood frozen in the hallway, not knowing what to do. I was 17 years old and still felt as helpless as a child. I wanted to break down the door, confront him, do something, but fear paralyzed me. Fear of him, of what he might do, fear of what I might discover. I turned around and left the house. I ran until I was out of breath. I came to this same square where I am now and sat on this same bench. I stayed here for hours, staring into space, feeling something inside me break. When I returned home that night, my mother was in the kitchen preparing dinner as if nothing had happened, cutting vegetables with mechanical precision, her face expressionless. But something was different. Her eyes were emptier than ever, as if something had finally shut down inside her. "Mum," I called her. She didn't respond right away. I called her again, louder. When she finally looked at me, she seemed not to recognize me for a second. "We need to get out of here," I said, quietly so my grandfather wouldn't hear from his room. "He's hurting you, I know it." She dropped the knife she was holding. The metallic clang seemed deafening in the silence of the kitchen. "Never say that again," she whispered with an intensity I had never seen before. "Never. You don't understand. You can't understand." "Then make me understand," I pleaded, holding her arms, feeling how thin they were, almost too fragile to bear my touch. "Please, Mum, we can't go on living like this." She moved closer to me, looked around as if afraid the walls had ears, and held my face in her hands. For the first time in years, her gaze seemed truly focused. "Some things are better left unknown, Miguel," she said in a trembling voice. "Some things destroy those who know them. Promise me you'll let this go." "Promise me." I promised, but I didn't keep my promise. That same night, I waited until everyone was asleep. I heard my grandfather take his heart medication. I heard his walker, his heavy footsteps, to the bedroom. I heard the silence that finally took over the house, and then I began to search. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for, but I knew there was something, some truth hidden in that house, something that explained the terror in my mother's eyes, the cruelty in my grandfather's behavior, something that explained why we lived like this, why we stayed there. I searched drawers, closets, old boxes in the attic. I found yellowed photos, old letters, documents of no apparent importance. I found my grandfather's military medals, certificates of honor, newspaper clippings about his exploits, the hero everyone believed him to be. That's when I decided to search my mother's room. I entered quietly, my heart beating so hard that I feared she might hear it even in her sleep. Moonlight streamed through the window, illuminating her face. Even in sleep, her expression was not peaceful. There was a tension there, as if even in her dreams she could not escape. I began to search her drawers, trying not to make a sound. Meticulously folded clothes, some simple jewelry, nothing revealing, until I noticed something strange about the antique dresser in the corner of the room. The bottom of one of the drawers didn't seem to fit perfectly. I carefully removed the clothes. I examined it more closely. There was a false bottom, a hiding place, and inside it a small diary with a red cover faded by time. It wasn't locked. It was as if she wanted it to be found eventually. I took the diary and quietly left the room. I went to the bathroom, closed the door, and sat down on the cold tile floor. There, under the dim light of a flashlight, I began to read. The first pages were dated 25 years ago. The handwriting was clearly that of a girl, rounded, irregular, with little hearts at the ends of the letters. To my mother. At age 12, dear diary, began the first entry. I received you as a gift from my teacher, Isabel. She said that everyone needs a place to keep their secrets, and I have many secrets to tell. The initial entries were what you would expect from a 12-year-old girl. Comments about school, about friends, about a boy she thought was cute, normal, everyday things. Until a few pages later, the tone changed. Dad came into my room again last night. He said he wanted to give me a goodnight kiss. But his kisses are different now. They make me feel strange, uncomfortable. I don't like it when he touches me that way. But he says that's how fathers show love for their special daughters. My stomach turned. I kept reading, each page more disturbing than the last. I tried to tell Aunt Rosa about what Dad does. She said I have too much imagination, that I'm making up stories, that Dad is a respected man, a hero, and that I should be ashamed of making up such lies. She told him. Now he locks my bedroom door at night. He says it's to protect me from monsters, but the only monster is him. The entries went on to detail years of abuse. How it started with touching that made her uncomfortable. How it escalated to something much worse. How it continued for years. How no one believed her when she tried to tell them. Today I took a test at the school nurse's office. I'm 2 weeks pregnant. I don't know what to do. I can't tell anyone. No one would believe me. No one ever believes. Pages later, another entry made me freeze. Dad was furious when he found out about the baby. He said, it's my fault for seducing him. How can a father say that to his own daughter? He gave me 2 choices. Get rid of the baby, or he'll tell everyone that I got involved with boys at school, that I'm promiscuous, unbalanced, that I made up stories about him because I'm mentally unstable. Who would believe me over him? No one. They never believe me. The diary entries became more sporadic after that. Weeks, sometimes months between them. The handwriting changed too, becoming more mature, more restrained. A brief note mentioned that she had decided to have the baby against his will, that she had fled to a friend's house in another city, that she was afraid but also hopeful. The baby was born today, a boy, Miguel, so small, so perfect. When I look at him, I see only love, not the horror of how he was conceived. He is my chance to do something pure in this world, to create something good out of so much evil. I will protect him with my life. He will never know the truth about his father. Never. The following pages told of the early years of my life. How she struggled to raise me alone. How she worked, too. Sometimes 3 jobs. How she did everything she could to give me a normal life away from him. Miguel turned 5 today. He is so intelligent, so kind. Sometimes I see my father's features in him, the shape of his chin, the way he frowns when he's concentrating. It scares me. I have nightmares where he turns into someone like my father. But then he smiles, and all that fear disappears. He's not my father. He's the same, pure, good, everything I couldn't be. There was a gap of almost 3 years. When the letters started again, the tone was different, desperate. He found us. I don't know how, but he found us. He showed up at the school gate when I went to pick up Miguel. He says he's sick, that he's sorry, that he wants to meet his grandson before he dies, as if he had some right to. He threatened to tell Miguel everything if I don't let him into our lives. What should I do? The last entry in the diary was when I was 8 years old, precisely when my grandfather came to live with us. I am betraying Miguel by letting this man into our lives. I am betraying everything I promised. But what choice do I have? He threatened to take Miguel away from me. He said he has proof that I'm mentally unstable, that as a decorated soldier and exemplary citizen, he would easily get custody, and he would get it. In this world, men like him always win. So I let him in, and with that, I let the monster back into my bed, my head, my life. Forgive me, Miguel. One day, maybe you'll understand that everything I did was to protect you. The diary ended there. I closed it with trembling hands, feeling sick. The pieces now fit together. My absent father, my grandfather's control over us, my mother's constant fear, the cycle that never ended. My grandfather was not just my grandfather, he was my father and my grandfather, the monster of my mother's nightmares, and now mine too. That night I did not sleep. I lay staring at the ceiling, feeling a rage so intense that it seemed to consume me from within, a rage unlike anything I had ever felt before, cold, calculated, patient. In the days that followed, I observed everything with new eyes. Every interaction between my mother and my grandfather, now charged with terrible meaning. Every time he called her, every time he touched her arm, every time he forced her to sit next to him on the sofa. It wasn't just the controlling behavior of an authoritarian father. It was the behavior of a predator who never let go of his prey. I began to notice other details as well. How he would sometimes look at me with a strange expression. How he would comment that I was becoming a man. How he insisted that we had the same strong blood. The disgust I felt in those moments was almost unbearable. I stopped going to school. I couldn't concentrate. I couldn't pretend everything was normal. I spent my days wandering around the city or sitting in this very square, imagining ways to free us from that nightmare. I tried to talk to my mother one last time. I didn't mention the diary, but I tried to get her to admit what was happening. If he's hurting you, we can go to the police, I said one night, when he had already retired. She laughed, a bitter, humorless laugh that seemed to tear at her throat. Police? Your grandfather has friends in the police. He has friends everywhere. He always has. Why do you think no one ever helped me? Then let's run away. I have some money saved up. We can go far away, change our names, start over. She took my hands in hers, her eyes filled with tears that refused to fall. Don't you understand, Miguel? He would find us. He always finds us. And next time it would be worse. It was at that moment that I realized that no one would come to save us, that any solution would have to come from me. The idea began to form in my mind, not all at once, but little by little, like drops of water slowly filling a glass until it overflows. I began to observe my grandfather's habits, his schedule, when he took his heart medication, 2 white pills, 1 blue, always at 9 p.m, when my mother left for work, night shifts on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, when he drank a glass of tequila almost every night after dinner, sometimes more on weekends. I began to plan. One afternoon I found my mother in the bathroom vomiting. I held her hair, gave her water. She was paler than ever, almost translucent under the fluorescent light. "What happened?" I asked, knowing she would lie. "Just a virus," she replied automatically. "It's going around the hospital. Nothing to worry about." But I saw the positive pregnancy test in the trash can, and something inside me just broke. Everything became extremely clear at that moment, as if all the fog of doubt and fear had been blown away by a strong wind. I knew what I needed to do to protect her, to protect the baby she was carrying, my brother, who would also be my uncle, to break this sick cycle once and for all. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat on the edge of the bed, looking out the window, watching the full moon light up the yard. The world kept turning outside. People were living their normal lives while inside that house we were trapped in a nightmare that had lasted for generations. I thought about Lucia, her easy smile, how she saw beauty in simple things. The flight of a bird, the patterns the clouds made in the sky. I thought about what it would be like to live like that, without the weight of secrets, without constant fear. I thought about what it would be like to introduce her to my mother, to see them talking, laughing together. A normal life, a life that seemed impossible as long as he existed. The next morning, I took my mother's diary and brought it with me to work. During my break, I went to the police station. I asked to speak to someone about a case of abuse. I showed them the diary and explained what was happening. The officer who attended to me, a middle-aged man with deep dark circles under his eyes, glanced at the diary with an impassive expression. When I finished my story, he closed the notebook and looked at me with what appeared to be pity. "Look, kid, these are very serious accusations. Your grandfather is Roberto Hernandez, the retired colonel, right?" When I nodded, he sighed. "I know your grandfather, a respected man, and you're here with a diary from decades ago, with no concrete evidence, accusing him of, well, serious crimes." "I'm not making this up," I protested. "My mother is suffering right now. Today he continues to abuse her, and now she's pregnant again. You need to do something." He leaned over the table and lowered his voice. "I'll be honest with you, even if we wanted to investigate, and I'm not saying we don't, it would be your word against his, and a judge is going to give more weight to the word of a decorated colonel than to that of a teenager with disciplinary problems at school." "What about the diary?" I asked desperately. "It could have been written at any time. It's not proof of anything." He handed the notebook back to me. "My advice is to finish school, get a job, help your mother get out of that situation legally. If abuse is happening now, she needs to be the one to report it. Do you understand?" I understood. I understood that the doors were closed, that the system was designed to protect men like my grandfather, that even those who should help were unwilling to challenge the status quo. I left the police station feeling lonelier than ever. I walked aimlessly around the city for hours, the diary weighing in my pocket like a stone. When I finally returned home, I had made my decision. If justice would not come through official channels, it would come through my own hands. That night was different from the others. I felt a strange calmness come over me, as if I were observing everything from outside my own body. A peace that came from certainty, from the decision already made, from the knowledge that I would finally do something to change our situation. We ate dinner in silence, as usual. My mother barely touched her food, moving the rice from one side of her plate to the other with her fork. She was paler than usual, her eyes red from recent crying. My grandfather complained about the taste, the temperature, everything. As usual. "This meat is too dry," he said, pushing his plate away. "How many times do I have to tell you how I like my food, Alina?" "Sorry, Dad," she muttered, picking up the plate. "I don't know why I'm still surprised," he continued, drinking his tequila. "You were always incompetent in the kitchen, incompetent at everything, really." I saw her hands tremble slightly as she cleared the table. I saw her shrink under his words, each insult like a physical blow. I saw and felt that cold rage grow even more inside me. After dinner, my mother left for her night shift at the hospital. It was Wednesday, her usual shift. Before she left, she hugged me tighter than usual, pressing me close to her, as if she were afraid she would never see me again. "I love you, son," she said, her eyes moist. "Never forget that." "I love you too, Mum," I replied, feeling a lump in my throat. "Everything will be fine, I promise." Something in my tone must have caught her attention, because she pulled away slightly, looking at me intently. "Miguel, what do you mean by that?" "Nothing," I replied, forcing a smile, "just that things are going to get better for both of us." She seemed to want to say something else, but my grandfather called her from the living room, irritated by the delay. She squeezed my hand one last time and left, leaving only the faint scent of her cheap perfume. When she left, I was alone with my grandfather. He settled into the living room armchair as he did every night, with his wooden cane beside him. He turned on the television and started watching some program, one of those talk shows where people yell about politics. "Bring me another tequila," he ordered, without taking his eyes off the television. I obeyed as I had done for years. I poured the amber liquid into the crystal glass he loved so much, one of the few valuable objects we owned. I placed the glass on the small table next to his armchair and walked away. "Sit down," he said, pointing to the sofa. "I want to talk to you." I sat down tensely, wondering if he had somehow found out about my visit to the police station. "I'm going to the bank tomorrow," he began, taking a sip of tequila. "I need to settle some matters regarding my will." "Your will?" I asked, genuinely surprised. "Yes, my will. I'm getting old, kid. I'm not going to be around forever." He gave a wry smile without humor. "Although sometimes it seems that way." A heavy silence fell between us. He continued after another sip. "I've been thinking, you're almost old enough to go to college. I have some contacts at the military academy. With my recommendation, you'd be guaranteed a place." "I don't want to go to the military academy," I replied automatically. He frowned. "I didn't ask what you want. I'm telling you what's going to happen." His tone brooked no argument. "It's time for you to become a real man, to follow the family tradition." The family tradition. As if our family had any tradition beyond secrets and pain. "And Mum?" I asked. "Who's going to take care of her while I'm away?" He looked at me with those cold eyes, so much like my own. "Your mother is not your responsibility. She's mine. She always was. She always will be." There was something in his tone, a sickening possessiveness, that made my stomach churn. At that moment, any doubts I might have had were dispelled. I knew what I needed to do. "I'm going to bed," I said, getting up. "Good night." "Think about what I said," he replied, turning his attention back to the television. "The military academy will make a name for you." I went to my room and waited. I waited until I heard the sound of his pills being swallowed, the sound of the glass of water being placed on the table. I waited until I heard the television being turned off, his heavy footsteps down the hall, the bedroom door closing. I waited until the house was completely silent, except for the ticking of the antique clock on the living room wall. It was 11:23 p.m. when I slowly descended the stairs. Each step a decision, each step leading me toward something from which there would be no turning back. The old wooden floor creaked under my feet, but I knew every treacherous board, every spot to avoid. Years of living in that house taught me to move like a ghost. I entered the living room. Moonlight streamed through the half-open curtains, casting long shadows on the furniture. The cane was leaning against the armchair. As always, I picked it up, feeling the weight of the polished wood in my hands. The eagle's head on the handle seemed to watch me with its silver eyes, judging me. I climbed the stairs again, the cane firmly in my grip. I stopped in front of his bedroom door. I could hear his heavy breathing inside, the slight snoring that indicated that the tequila and medication had already taken effect. I turned the doorknob slowly, mentally grateful for keeping the hinges well oiled. Another military habit he imposed on us. The room was dark, lit only by the dim light of the night lamp. He was lying there on his back, his chest rising and falling at a steady pace. He looked so harmless and asleep, like any old man, not like the monster I knew him to be. "Grandpa," I called out in a voice that didn't seem like my own. He opened his eyes slowly, consciousness returning little by little. When he saw me standing by the bed, holding the cane, irritation replaced his initial confusion. "What's going on, boy? What are you doing in my room at this hour? I know what you did to my mother." There was a moment of silence, a moment when I saw something pass through his eyes. Surprise, perhaps fear, but it was soon replaced by the usual contempt. "I don't know what you're talking about. Go back to your room before I lose my patience. I know she's pregnant again. Your daughter, my mother." He sat up in bed, now fully awake. His eyes narrowed, sizing me up like a predator assesses a potential threat. "Be careful what you say, kid. Very careful. I read your diary," I continued, my voice growing firmer. "I know everything. I know what you did to her when she was a child. I know you never stopped. I know I'm the result of that." He stood up. Despite his age, his posture was rigid, his shoulders straight like the soldier he always was. Tall and imposing even in old age, that presence that always intimidated me. To my surprise, he didn't deny it. He just looked at me with an almost amused expression. "And what are you going to do about it?" he asked with a contemptuous smile. "Tell who? Who's going to believe you against me, a respected elder of the community against a troubled teenager?" "I already went to the police," I replied. I showed him the diary. A shadow of concern passed over his face, but it quickly disappeared. "And what did they say?" "Let me guess. That there's not enough evidence, that it's my word against yours, that the diary could have been written at any time." He was right, of course. That was exactly what they had said. "I'm going to get her out of here," I said, trying to sound confident. "We'll go far away from you." He laughed, a laugh that reverberated off the walls of the room. "Your mother will never leave. She never had the courage. She was always weak like you." He took a step toward me, trying to intimidate me with his physical presence. "Now give me back my cane and go back to your room, and maybe I'll forget this insolence, or we're going to have a serious problem, you and me." It was at that moment that something broke inside me. All the pent-up rage, all the fear, all the helplessness, everything turned into action. I don't remember consciously moving. I just remember feeling the cane in my hands, raising it in the air. The first blow took him by surprise, hitting him on the shoulder, causing him to stagger backwards. His eyes widened, not in pain, but in amazement. Amazement at seeing his grandson, the quiet and obedient boy, finally react. "What do you think you're doing?" he asked, more surprised than scared. I didn't answer. The second blow hit his legs, causing him to fall. He tried to get up, but he no longer had the agility of youth. The third blow hit his ribs. I heard a crack like a dry branch breaking. "Miguel, stop," he ordered, raising his hands in defense. "Stop right now." But I couldn't stop. Each blow released years of trauma, of secrets, of pain. Each impact reverberated through the silent house like a scream I could never give. "This is for what you did to her," I said through clenched teeth as the cane came down again. "For all these years, for all the nights," she cried. "For every time you made her feel small, dirty, unworthy." At some point, he stopped defending himself, stopped talking, stopped moving. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. It was as if something had taken hold of me, something stronger than my conscious will. The cane went up and down, up and down. The sound it made was wet, now different, the polished wood becoming stained, slippery in my hands. I don't know how long it lasted. Minutes, hours. It seemed like an eternity and an instant simultaneously. I only know that eventually I stopped, panting, looking at what I had done. He was motionless on the floor, almost unrecognizable. The cane in my hands was stained. My hands, my face, my clothes, everything was stained. The room smelled of iron and salt and something more primitive, more animalistic. I felt no remorse at that moment. I felt nothing but a strange relief, as if a huge weight had been lifted from my chest, as if I could breathe fully for the first time in my life. I dropped the cane beside him and walked away. I went to the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. The face staring back at me looked like a stranger's. Wild eyes, tense features, red splatters, contrasting with the paleness of my skin. I washed my hands, my face, the water in the drain turning red, then pink, then clear. Again I changed my clothes, putting the dirty ones in a plastic bag. I went back to his room. I checked that he was still motionless. There was no pulse, no breathing, only silence. I sat in the living room and waited. I waited for my mother to return from the hospital. I waited for the sun to rise. I waited for the world to keep turning, even though mine had stopped that night. I didn't call the police. I didn't run away. I just waited, sitting on the sofa, staring into space. For the first time in years, I felt a strange peace. The monster was dead. The cycle was broken. When my mother arrived hours later, I didn't need to say anything. She saw me sitting in the living room. She saw my expression. She saw the plastic bag with the clothes next to me. Her eyes widened in understanding. "Miguel," she whispered, her voice almost inaudible. "What did you do?" "What no one else would do," I replied simply. She ran upstairs, her footsteps echoing through the silent house. I heard her stifled cry coming from the bedroom. A cry that contained horror, yes, but also something else. Something that sounded frighteningly like relief. When she returned to the living room, her face was pale, but her eyes were different, somehow clearer, as if a weight had been lifted from them as well. She sat down next to me on the sofa and took my hands in hers. We remained like that for a long time in silence. Finally, she spoke. "You know," she said, not as a question, but as a statement. "Yes," I replied. "I found your diary." She closed her eyes as if absorbing a blow. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm sorry you found out this way. I'm sorry it came to this." "There was no other way," I said. "I tried every legal avenue. No one would help us. No one would believe us." She nodded slowly, silent tears running down her face. "What will we do now?" she asked in a trembling voice. I thought for a moment. "I'm going to call the police. I'll tell them it was a burglar who broke in, attacked you, and I defended myself." She shook her head. She said, with a firmness that surprised me, "I'm not going to let you take the blame for something I should have prevented long ago." Then she did something I will never forget. She took the cane, that same stained cane, and pressed it against her own hands, against her face, her clothes. "I'm going to say it was me," she declared, her eyes shining with a determination I had never seen in her before. "I'm going to say that he tried to force himself on me again, and this time I fought back, that I couldn't take it anymore." "Mum," I didn't protest. I'm not going to let you sacrifice yourself like this. It's not sacrifice, Miguel. It's liberation. She caressed my face, leaving a faint red mark on my cheek. You have your whole life ahead of you. I've already lived mine, and much of it was a nightmare from which I could never wake up until now. Before I could protest further, she was already calling the police. Her voice on the phone was firm, controlled. She told a story about how her father, with whom she lived, had drunk too much, how he had tried to abuse her as he had done for years, how this time she had defended herself with his own cane. When the police arrived, she was sitting on the sofa, the cane still in her hands, stained red like her fingerprints. She repeated the same story with the same disturbing calm. They asked me if I had seen anything. I said I had been asleep, that I woke up to the noise, that I went downstairs and found my mother like that, sitting on the couch, that she told me what had happened, that I didn't know what to do. So I just sat next to her and waited. They seemed to believe us. Why wouldn't they? A woman with signs of recent abuse, an elderly man with a history of violence and alcoholism, a murder weapon with her fingerprints on it. Everything fit perfectly, except for the diary that proved decades of abuse, the diary I had hidden in my room under the loose floorboard, the diary that could lend credibility to my mother's story of self-defense. While the police investigated the scene, I went to my room and took the diary. I handed it to the detective who seemed to be in charge, explaining what it was, whose it was. This proves it wasn't a one-time thing, I said. This proves he had been doing this to her for years. The detective leafed through the diary with a grave expression, nodding slowly. This changes a lot, he finally said. Thank you for showing us this. They took my mother to the police station to make a formal statement. They left me with a social worker, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, who asked me if I had any relatives I could stay with. I told her no, that it was just me and my mother. She nodded. She wrote something down on her clipboard. That night I slept at Lucia's house, whose parents offered to take me in when they heard what had happened. The news spread quickly through the small town. The war hero killed by his own daughter. The family scandal no one could have imagined. The next day I went to the police station. I wanted to see my mother and find out what was going on. The detective received me in his office, his expression serious. Your mother is being charged with murder, he said. But given the circumstances, we are recommending that it be considered self-defense. What about the diary? I asked. Doesn't that prove that she was a victim for years? He hesitated, looking away. The diary, well, it seems to have been lost during the process. We couldn't locate it. I felt the blood drain from my face. The missing diary, the only concrete evidence of the prolonged abuse, of the horror my mother lived through for decades, gone. What do you mean lost? I asked, my voice trembling with rage. I gave it to you. It's proof that she was a victim for years. Calm down, son, said the detective, raising his hands in a placating gesture. We're investigating the disappearance. In the meantime, we have your statement, the recent signs of abuse, the medical records showing frequent visits to the emergency room for domestic accidents. It's a solid case, even without the diary, but it wasn't. No, really, without the diary, it was just her word against the memory of a hero, a man respected by the community, a decorated military man, a devoted father who raised his daughter alone after the mysterious death of his wife. I left the command center feeling that the system had failed us once again, that the same forces that had protected my grandfather for decades continued to protect his memory even after his death. In the days that followed, the situation worsened. The story leaked to the local press. The newspapers made no mention of the abuse. They spoke of family tragedy, possible mental instability, suspicions about the real motive for the crime. Some even insinuated that my mother had killed my grandfather for money, for his military pension, for his house. The community was divided. Some believed the self-defense version, others, the majority, defended the memory of Colonel Hernandez, a war hero and exemplary citizen. Neighbors who used to greet us now crossed the street to avoid us. I received hostile looks at school, whispers in the hallways, "Son of the murderer." I heard someone murmur as I walked by. 2 weeks later, something even worse happened. My mother, who had been released to stand trial, suffered a miscarriage. Stress, the doctors explained, physical and emotional trauma. Her body simply couldn't sustain the pregnancy. She was hospitalized for 3 days. When she came home, she was even more fragile, more broken. She would sit for hours on the porch, staring into space, her hands absent-mindedly caressing her now empty belly. It was around that time that I began to think that maybe I had made a mistake. Not for killing my grandfather. I never regretted that, nor should I, but for allowing my mother to take the blame, for not realizing that the system that had failed to protect her for decades would continue to fail. A month after the incident, I made a decision. One Tuesday morning before school, I sat down with my mother in the kitchen. "I'm going to tell the truth," I said determinedly. "I'm going to say that I was the one who killed him, that you're blaming yourself to protect me." She looked at me with those eyes that had seen too much, suffered too much. "No, Miguel," she said firmly. "I won't allow that." "But Mum, they don't believe you. They're distorting everything, making you look crazy or greedy. Without the diary, we have no way to prove the abuse." "But if I confess, if you confess, you'll go to prison," she interrupted. "Maybe not for long, since you're a minor, but you'll go, and I can't allow that. And if they convict you, if you go to prison in my place." She took my hands in hers, her eyes steady for the first time in weeks. "Then I'll go, and every day in there I'll be freer than any day I spent in this house with him." Her voice was firm, determined. "I'm not going to let him destroy you too, Miguel. He's already taken too much from me. My childhood, my youth, my chance at a normal life. He's not going to take my son away from me." I tried to argue further, but she was adamant, and deep down, part of me knew she was right. That the guilt I would feel if she were imprisoned in my place would consume me as much as the hatred I felt for my grandfather. The trial was scheduled for 3 months later. During that time, our life became a nightmare. We had to move. The neighbors practically drove us out with their ostracism and hostility. My mother lost her job at the hospital. Staff reorganization, they said. But we knew the real reason. I stopped going to school, unable to bear the stares, the whispers, the isolation. Lucia was the only one who stood by me. She visited me at the new house, a small, cheap apartment on the outskirts of town. She brought food prepared by her mother, notes from the classes I was missing, news from the outside world that seemed increasingly distant. "People will eventually forget," she said, trying to comfort me. "It will pass," but I knew it wouldn't. No, some stains really can't be removed. Some wounds never heal completely. A week before the trial, when the situation seemed like it couldn't get any worse, something unexpected happened. A package arrived in the mail with no return address. Inside was my mother's red diary, and next to it an anonymous note. "Make use of this. Not everyone in the police force is corrupt." We never found out who sent it. Some conscientious police officer, perhaps an employee at headquarters, who found the lost diary and decided to do the right thing. We immediately took the diary to the lawyer assigned to defend my mother, a competent woman but overloaded with cases. She leafed through the notebook with an increasingly serious expression. "This changes everything," she finally said. "With this, We can prove decades of abuse. We can transform a case of murder into self-defense or, at most, manslaughter due to strong emotion. For the first time in months, I felt a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, the system that had always failed us would finally do something right. The trial was brief, considering the seriousness of the case. The diary was accepted as evidence, despite protests from the prosecution. Experts confirmed that the handwriting was consistent over the years, that the paper and ink matched the periods indicated, and that it could not have been forged recently. Doctors testified about my mother's frequent domestic accidents over the years. A former teacher of hers came to testify, saying she had always suspected abuse, but never had enough evidence to report it. I testified too. I talked about the atmosphere at home, about the constant fear, about how my grandfather controlled every aspect of our lives. I omitted, of course, the fact that it was I who killed him. That version of the story had already been buried with him. When the jury retired to deliberate, my mother and I waited in the courtroom lobby, hands clasped, hearts racing. Lucia was there too, sitting on my other side, a comforting presence amid the chaos. Whatever the outcome, my mother said softly, I want you to know that I don't regret protecting you, finally telling the truth, putting an end to all this. The jury returned after barely 2 hours, a surprisingly short time for such a complex case. The verdict, not guilty. Self-defense. After years of documented abuse, there were murmurs in the courtroom, looks of disbelief, of anger. My grandfather's friends, his former military colleagues, his supporters in the community, all seemed shocked by the outcome, but there were also sighs of relief, gestures of approval. The few people who believed in us from the beginning, who saw beyond the facade of the war hero. We left the courthouse to face a small group of reporters. My mother, normally so shy, so reserved, lifted her head and spoke with surprising clarity. Today is not just a victory for me, but for all the silenced victims, for all those who suffer abuse within their own homes at the hands of those who should protect them. Let my story be a reminder. Silence protects only the abuser, never the victim. That night, back in our small apartment, I cried for the first time since my grandfather's death. Not for him, never for him, but for all we had lost, for all we could have been under different circumstances. For my mother, whose life was stolen for decades. For myself, forced to grow up too soon, to see and do things that no teenager should. 2 weeks later, when the dust began to settle, I noticed that something had changed in my mother. She smiled more, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. She started wearing colorful clothes, letting her hair down. Small changes, almost imperceptible to anyone who didn't know her well. But to me, they were like watching a flower finally bloom after an endless winter. It was then that I believed we had finally turned the page, that we could begin to rebuild our lives, that the final blow came. One night, coming home from work at the mechanic's shop, I found 2 police officers at the door of our apartment. Their faces were serious, their postures tense. Miguel Hernandez asked the older one. Yes, I replied, feeling a knot in my stomach. We need you to come with us to the station. We have some questions about the death of your grandfather, Roberto Hernandez. Why? The case wasn't closed. My mother was found innocent. Yes, your mother was, replied the police officer, emphasizing your mother. But we have received new information that contradicts the testimony given in court. My heart raced. Did someone know? Had someone seen something, heard something, or simply connected the dots? What kind of information? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. We'd prefer to discuss that at the station, he replied. Will you come voluntarily, or do we need a warrant? I went voluntarily, of course. What other choice did I have? On the way, I sent a message to Lucia, asking her to let my mother know, to tell her not to worry, that I would be back soon. Comforting lies that even I didn't believe. At headquarters, they took me to an interrogation room, a small room with grey walls, a metal table in the center, 2 chairs, just like in the movies, I thought distractedly. The police left me waiting for almost an hour before coming in. An intimidation tactic, probably. When they finally entered, they were carrying a thick folder. Miguel, the older one, began, sitting down across from me. I'm going to be direct with you. We have evidence that it wasn't your mother who killed your grandfather. I kept my face impassive, my heart pounding against my ribs. What evidence? He opened the folder and took out some photographs, photos of the crime scene, of the body, of the bloody cane. Forensic experts reanalyzed these images. He explained the position of the body, the angle of the blows, the force required to cause the type of injuries observed. Everything indicates that the attacker was taller and stronger than your mother. Someone like you, for example. I didn't respond. What could I say? He continued. We have the testimony of a neighbor who claims to have seen your mother arriving home at 6 a.m., well after the estimated time of death. He saw her from his garden, where he was watering the plants before dawn. He says she looked shocked when she went inside, as if she didn't know what she was going to find. I felt the blood drain from my face. The neighbor, old Mr. Ramirez, who suffered from insomnia and used to tend his garden at the strangest hours. I never thought he could have seen anything. That's a mistake, I stammered. My mother already confessed. She was tried. She was acquitted. Yes, and we can't try her again for the same crime. The policeman agreed. The principal of non bis in I. But you were never charged or tried for anything. The other policeman, who had remained silent until then, leaned forward. Miguel, we understand why you did it, and we understand why your mother took the blame. But lying in court is a crime. Obstruction of justice is a crime. I want a lawyer, I finally said, my voice firmer than I felt. Sure, replied the senior police officer, leaning back in his chair. It's your right. But think about this. If you confess now voluntarily, that will be taken into consideration. You are a minor with no criminal record, and considering the circumstances, the documented abuse, your emotional state, you are likely to receive a reduced sentence, perhaps a few years in a juvenile rehabilitation center. And if you don't confess, then we'll go to trial with the evidence we have, and believe me, it's substantial. In that case, even though you are a minor, you could receive a much harsher sentence, and your mother will be charged with perjury, obstruction of justice, and falsification of evidence. My mother, everything I did was to protect her, to free her, and now she could go to prison for trying to protect me. I want to talk to her, I said. Before deciding anything, the police exchanged glances, considering the request. All right, agreed the older one. Finally, they left me alone again. The minutes dragged on like hours. Finally, the door opened and my mother entered, accompanied by a policewoman who stood discreetly in the corner of the room. My mother seemed to have aged years in the few hours since I had last seen her. Her face was pale, her eyes red from crying. When she saw me, she ran to hug me, pressing me against her as if she feared I might disappear. Miguel, she whispered in a broken voice. My son. Mum, I replied, feeling the tears I had held back for so long finally overflow. They know it was me. She pulled back a little, held my face in her hands, looking me in the eyes. Listen to me carefully, she said with fierce intensity. You're not going to confess anything. I've already been tried and acquitted. They can't touch me now. But they can charge you with perjury, with obstruction. They can send you to prison anyway. She shook her head determinedly. Let them try. I'm going to deny everything. I'm going to say I took the blame because I was in shock, because I wanted to protect my father's memory, because I was confused. I'll say anything but the truth. What if they have enough evidence against me? Her eyes filled with tears again. Then we'll fight with every resource we have. I'm not going to let him win, Miguel. I'm not going to let him continue destroying our lives, even in death. We talked for a few more minutes, planning what we would say, how we would defend ourselves. When the police indicated that time was up, my mother hugged me one last time. Be strong, she whispered in my ear. Remember who you are, not what you were forced to do, but who you really are. After she left, the police officers returned. They sat down in front of me, again with expectant expressions. So, asked the older one, cooperate? I took a deep breath, thinking about everything that had happened, about the red diary that revealed the truth, about the blood-stained cane, about my mother's expression when she finally told her story to the world, about the baby she lost, my half-brother, who would also be my uncle, about the lives destroyed by silence, by fear, by impunity. Yes, I finally replied. I'll tell you everything, but I want a written agreement. I want guarantees that my mother will not be prosecuted for anything related to this case. The younger policeman protested, but the older one silenced him with a gesture. Can I consult with the prosecutor? He said. I can't promise anything, but given the history of the case, I think we can reach an agreement. And so, in that cold, grey room, I began to tell the true story of what happened that night. Every detail, every word exchanged, every blow struck, the truth I had kept for so long, that I had buried along with my grandfather, that I had drowned to protect my mother. When I finished, I felt a strange relief, as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. Not regret, never regret for what I did, but relief at finally telling the truth, at taking responsibility for my actions. The deal was closed the next day. In exchange for my full confession, my mother would not be charged with anything, and I, because of my age and the extraordinary circumstances, would serve 2 years in a juvenile rehabilitation center, followed by 3 years of probation. The judge who signed the sentence looked at me long and hard before banging his gavel. Miguel Hernandez, he said, the court recognizes the extreme circumstances that led to this act. It recognizes the documented abuse, the family trauma, the failure of institutions to protect you and your mother. This does not justify what you did, but it certainly contextualizes it. Use this time to reflect, to heal, to rebuild. Don't let this act define who you are or who you will become. Wise words, I suppose, but difficult to follow when you spend 2 years in a rehabilitation center surrounded by other young people whose lives were also marked by violence, trauma, and pain. And so, here I am, first day of freedom, 18 years old, a whole life ahead of me, and a past I can never completely leave behind. The 2 years in rehab were complicated. At first it was difficult, very difficult. When the other inmates found out why I was there, they reacted in different ways. Some avoided me as if violence were contagious. Others respected me in a distorted way. The boy who killed his own grandfather to protect his mother. Some even shared similar stories of abuse, of silence, of systems that failed to protect them. I had therapy, of course, lots of therapy. Hours and hours talking about my grandfather, my mother, what happened that night, about anger and guilt and fear and relief, about how I felt knowing that I was the result of a monstrous act, about how I secretly feared that there was something of him in me, some gene, some predisposition to violence, to evil. You are not your grandfather, my therapist would repeat, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a firm voice. You are not defined by how you were conceived or what you were forced to do. You are defined by your choices from here on out. Little by little, I began to believe that. Not completely, perhaps never completely, but enough to carry on, to get up every morning, to participate in activities, to make plans for the future. My mother visited me regularly. With each visit, she seemed a little more alive. The dark circles under her eyes diminished. She smiled more often. That genuine smile that reached her eyes, which I hadn't seen in so long. She cut her hair, started wearing brighter colors, occasionally put on makeup, small changes that signaled a greater internal transformation. She got a job in another city a few hours away. Not as a nurse, she wasn't ready to return to that environment yet, but as a receptionist at a medical clinic, a simple job without the stress of the hospital, without the painful memories. She sold the house where we grew up, where everything happened. She couldn't live there again, she explained. Every corner held a memory, a ghost. She bought a small apartment with the money from the sale, furnished it with new, colorful, bright pieces, nothing from the old house, nothing that could bring back those memories. Lucia also visited me, although less frequently. Distance, time, circumstances, everything conspired to gradually drive us apart. On her last visit a few months ago, she told me she had been accepted to a university in another state and would be leaving after graduation. Her eyes sparkled when she talked about the future, her plans, her dreams. And although part of me felt a pang of sadness, knowing that our paths would definitely separate, another part was happy for her, for having the opportunity to live a normal life without the weight of my ghosts. At the center, I tried to continue my studies. It wasn't easy with all the interruptions, with everything that happened, but I managed to get my high school diploma with reasonable grades, not enough for a great university, but enough for a technical course, perhaps something practical with which I could earn a living. I learned some skills too. Carpentry in the center's workshop. I discovered that I like working with wood. There is something therapeutic about transforming a rough piece of material into something useful, something beautiful, ironic perhaps, considering the role that a wooden object played in my story, but perhaps also appropriate as a form of redemption, of re-signification. I made some friends, or something like that. Not deep, true friendships, like the one I had with Lucia, but connections, camaraderie, shared moments that made the days more bearable. I learned a few things in those 2 years. I learned that secrets have power, that silence can be as destructive a weapon as any baton, that sometimes monsters don't look like monsters, they look like loving grandparents, authority figures, people who should protect us. I learned that justice and the law do not always go hand in hand, that some crimes go unpunished for generations, that sometimes healing only begins when someone has the courage to break the cycle. I learned about forgiveness too, not forgiveness for my grandfather, that will never come and nor should it, but forgiveness for myself, perhaps for not seeing before, for not acting differently, for choosing violence when maybe, just maybe, there could have been another way. I learned about my mother, her strength, her resilience, her unconditional love, how, despite everything she suffered, she managed to raise me with tenderness, with affection, how even in the darkest moments she tried to protect me as best she could. When you were born, she told me during a visit, it was the first time I felt hope in many years. I looked at you, so small, so perfect, and I thought, this is my son, not his, my son, whom I will love and protect with my life. Now, sitting in this square where I so often sought refuge, I feel the weight of those lessons, of those discoveries. I feel the weight of the decisions I made and those that were made for me. I feel the weight of the lost years, the wasted opportunities, the postponed dreams. but I also feel a strange lightness. The lightness that comes from the truth finally told, the cycle finally broken, the monster finally defeated. Soon I will go to meet my mother at the bus station. We will go to our new city, our new beginning. She is in therapy. She is also learning to live without fear, without guilt. We are learning together. I got a job in a carpentry shop thanks to a social reintegration program. It's not glamorous, but it's honest. It's a start, a brick in the construction of a new life. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night sweating, my heart racing. I dream about that night, about the cane in my hands, about the sound it made with each blow. I dream about his eyes wide with surprise, then with pain, then empty. In those moments, I question everything. I wonder if I did the right thing, if there was another way, if I'm really any different from him. But then I remember the red diary, the words written in my mother's childish handwriting, describing horrors that no child should ever know. I remember how she changed after his death, how she blossomed, how she freed herself. I remember that despite everything, we are here, survivors, not just existing, but beginning to truly live. The story doesn't end here, of course. I bear the scars of what happened, of what I discovered, of what I did. I bear the weight of the decisions I made and those that were made for me. I carry the shadow of my grandfather, the ghost of what he was, what he did, what I could have become. But I also carry the light of my mother, her courage, her strength, her capacity to love, even after so much suffering. I carry the lessons I learned painfully about truth, about justice, about healing. I carry hope, the hope that the future can be different, that cycles can be broken, that secrets can be brought to light, that wounds, even the deepest ones, can heal with time. If you've made it this far and understand what I went through, I ask you to like this video, subscribe to the Traumatic Testimonies channel, turn on notifications, and comment what time it is where you are as you watch this. It may seem strange, but every comment makes me feel less alone with this story. It makes me believe that perhaps sharing this could help someone who is living their own silence, their own secret. Because the truth is that there are many homes like mine, many families where abuse is passed down from generation to generation, many children trapped in cycles they did not create, and maybe, just maybe, telling this story will help someone find the courage my mother couldn't find, the courage to speak up, to seek help, to get out before it's too late, before the silence turns into violence. My name is Miguel Hernandez. This is my story, and today, for the first time in a long time, the future seems like a place where I might belong.